Okay. I think we're streaming. I think
Oh,
we're
great.
right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for being here, Bert, because I always have these. So I've been doing this for less than a year, but more than 6 months. And I always tell people about like, the absolute universe and Scott Snyder and all the like great writers that have been around, and everybody already knows them. So
Yeah.
now to actually be able to bring the next big writer that they don't even know about yet. I'm scooping everybody here.
Oh man.
And so this is very, very exciting for me. And I'm sure for everybody who tunes in. So the intro, just we've got Bert, a nurse, a musician, and you know what? I spent all that time working to pronounce it's Bert Garibay, right?
That's right. Yeah. Very good, Roy.
I got to tell you, I had a traumatic experience many years ago, and it was a guy who's Greek, and his last name was uh, Chasiotis.
Yeah, that's
And
hard.
I talked to him before, and he told me how to pronounce it. And I was like, okay. He said, but you can just call me George. And I was like, yeah, okay, but I want to get it. And so I'm like working on it. And I think I've got it. And then we get on to the actual interview and I say it wrong. like to the point where he's like telling me, just George is
He wants you
fine,
to. Yeah,
but I
he's like,
won't
come on,
stop.
just go ahead and stop.
And I think that's actually now that's considered a microaggression. Like today, I
Oh
think I
wow.
deleted
Oh
that, but if
gosh.
somebody found that, I would probably be canceled. Okay. So
Oh man.
anyway, I'm a little bit scared of saying names. But so yeah, Bert, a nurse, a
Yeah.
musician,
Yeah.
and
Dad.
now the writer behind an indie comic coming up called Essential. And yes, a dad. And really, I mean, I felt like you've kind of a man of many talents. So
Well, thanks, Roy.
I'm
So
really
are
I'm
you.
excited. You've got a story. It's about
Yeah.
burnout. It's about family. It's about what happens when all the superheroes are dead and now we're relying on the people who maybe we've overlooked or maybe almost been a little patronizing towards. Um,
Yeah.
I'm excited. So if you're finished with the first issue, pretty much. I know that you're
Yeah.
still workshopping it. You're kind of wrestling with some AI tools, and you're here. You're going to talk about the process, and basically anybody who's interested in comics, especially superhero comics that aren't the same as every other comic that they've read. Anybody who wants to write a comic, or anybody who just wants to get a glimpse of the next big thing before he's too famous to have time to stop by on my YouTube channel. This is for you. So thank you, Bert.
Well, thank you, Roy. Sorry, I was just getting my little notebook and everything here ready because I like to just have all my stuff.
So
Yeah.
you gotta be prepared.
Yeah.
Well, so tell me, you're a nurse. You're writing a superhero comic
Yeah.
based on a nurse and set during a kind of familiar time for some of us. Can you talk
Yeah.
to us a little bit about that and maybe let us know if any of this was like maybe kind of working through some stuff that had happened to you in real life or what happened
Sure.
there?
Yeah. So I wanted to write something that was really different. So I've been writing short fiction for years now. You know, it's mostly like literary short fiction. Usually, it's very the vibe of the stuff that I've written is very centered on a character, and they're going through something, you know, and it's like usually it's a very short scene, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the scene, and people have always told me that they can really get immersed in the scene that I describe and what's going on with this character. So that's just generally how I approach things when I write. But I wanted to. I love comics. I didn't get into comics until I was an adult, and I never really got into like the mainstream superhero comics. Um, I think maybe because as getting into it as an adult, like I have this bias. It's kind of a lame, ignorant viewpoint, but I just kind of thought superheroes are like this thing that's like, well, really what it is. I was gonna say like maybe it's like a thing for kids or whatever, but that's not really true. What it really was is that like it's such a big, huge world that I didn't know where to start. Um, there's all these, these publishers, these major publishers, and there's all these storylines and all these movies that come out, and I'm just like, I don't even know like where to start. I'm like the kind of person who likes to know the beginnings of things and follow storylines through. So anyway, um, I had seen shows like The Boys, and some other like indie comics that have like little things having to do with supernatural stuff, and I thought, I would like to try to write something like that. That's a little bit different for me. And so I just thought I can write. That's the great thing about writing is you can write about anything. Um, so I just thought of the pandemic was going on when I wrote this, and I just thought, what if there was a what if there was some like disease or some pandemic going on, but it only affected the world's superheroes? So this made me excited because I had never written anything like this before. And like when this kind of thing happens, the ideas start rolling, and then I obsess over something and just keep thinking about it all the time and developing the story in my mind. But yeah, at the time I was working in a hospital. I still do, but I was working in a regular unit where you take care of like 4 or 6 patients at a time, and you're there with them 12 hours a day, and you have to like do everything from feed them to clean them up after they you know um, mess themselves, and you have to give them meds, and you have to help them with everything. It's like a typical nurse stuff. um, but I thought, yeah, what if you had to do this with people that had like superpowers, and the thing that made it more interesting, like kept coming up with little like what ifs. Like that's the magic of writing, is when you're just like, well, what if this? What if that? Oh my gosh, that's awesome. What if this? And then you're like, oh, wait, that won't work. And then it's like puzzle. It's like making a puzzle, because you come up with little tidbits that are details that might work, but then if you think a couple of steps down the road, like in a chess game, you realize that won't fit because this other big detail, which is really important, won't work with that. So you kind of have to keep moving things around and keep coming up with ideas and letting things go. So I just came up with this thought of like, what if they're superheroes and they were getting sick, um, and then they weren't available to the world anymore because they're quarantined. They're either getting sick or they're it's the idea of this population of people that are typically superhuman, that don't need anybody's help. They're like the opposite of vulnerable, right? Um, what if they were all of a sudden vulnerable? Like they were scared, they were quarantined, they were, isolated. And then there's a scene in the book where there's like a whole series of protesters outside the hospital, and there's that indicates that there's like a cultural sort of backlash against the superheroes and all the attention that's being afforded to them and all the resources, and it's kind of speaks to you know some of the social you know issues that have been going on in our country over the last whatever, like 10 years. And so it kind of has a little bit of everything in there in terms of politics and social movements and stuff like that.
And I don't want to get too much into the process yet at this point, but I have to ask. I think
Yeah.
everybody who wants to write a comic,
Mm-hmm.
I think so many people have ideas for comics. And so you mentioned that stage where you look, the idea pops in your head.
Yeah.
The pieces start to come together, and then you actually put the pieces together. I'm curious, can you put your finger on maybe one thing about yourself and your process that makes you different from the people who have a whole bunch of puzzle pieces for like 50 different puzzles in the shoebox of their brain, and the person who actually puts that puzzle together and everybody's like, wow, that's a great looking puzzle?
Sure. Well, I don't really know how. I think that there's probably a lot of different processes for different people, because I've read. several books about writing, and so I'm aware that there's all kinds of approaches to it. But I have read that some comic book script writers are like, these are kind of like the bigger names, I guess, people that are already established. Like apparently they'll write outlines, and they'll just like give them to artists, and the artists just interpret it however they want. But I mean, that's like on another level, apparently. Um, but the real magic of writing for me happens. It happens in this weird intersection. Like I have to like get in that mind space. It's like where you have like a bunch of pieces in your brain, and it's like for me it's scenes, because for me everything is visual. Like I like am in the room with these people while this stuff is happening, and it's like sequential. So it's like watching a movie. Um, but then what happens is, I guess, like I know my brain well enough. I guess I like max out. Like I can't. I can only go so far before my mental energy is kind of like spent, and so I'll just get so excited about everything that I'm seeing and everything that they're saying, what they're doing, and then I'm just like, and then this is from experience, is knowing that if I don't do it, I'm gonna lose it. Like what I mean by do it is if I don't write it down, I'm gonna lose it. So, meaning like I'm gonna lose the idea, I'm gonna lose the details and all the key points. So, um, well, I take notes constantly. Um, you hear about this a lot with writers, how they have like a little notebook, and I think artists, like visual artists, have like little, they're like, it's like a nerdy aspect of being a creative person that writes or draws, is you carry around a little notebook with you all the time. But I don't think it's nerdy. I think it's normal. But but now with phones, with smartphones, I just use like my Google Notes, and I have
Hmm.
like just tons of notes in there, and I have to be really careful about labeling them, and and then I go back and read through them, and there's something to be said for giving yourself some time in between putting these notes down, these ideas down, getting them out of your head. It's almost like a trash compactor. It's like you put too much trash in the bin, and it won't hold any more trash. It's not
Hmm.
trash. It's like it's gold, but it won't fit. So you have to take it out. You have to put it somewhere else. So I put it on the page, and then it frees up space. It frees up energy, and then so then you can go back and you can take those notes, and you can start doing the real work. And the real work is the stuff that I don't think anybody likes, is because like I again reading about writers, and my sister is a writer, both of them are, and I talk about that with them, and I've been in creative writing classes and stuff, and from what I gather, nobody really likes the process of writing. The process of writing is just tedious and,
We
and
just want to
boring.
have written.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. And the thing that happens, and I think you and I were texting about this the other day, is like if you're not working from notes, or if you're not working from some structured chunks of information that you can kind of plug into a bigger page, um, then as you start writing, your brain starts kind of going off on tangents, and you can get lost. You can get stuck in the weeds. Like you can just start thinking about details, and your brain. I think that we're hardwired. Like I don't know about you, but I know me. I have ADHD. I know like I have a tendency to just want that dopamine hit. Like I want like instant gratification, instant satisfaction, just whatever, like the juicy bits. I just want all the good stuff. And it's easy to get stuck in the weeds because you want to work out all these details and think about all the what ifs. And that's what it is. It's the what ifs, the what ifs. Like those are the little tasty things that make your brain excited, you know? And if you go down that path of constantly what if, what if, what if, when you're in that writing stage, you can just get hijacked. Like you won't make
Yeah.
any progress. So that's just where I guess experience and discipline comes in, um, and I'm not like some uh, like prolific writer. Like I probably have a project every like couple of years, so it's not like I'm sitting around writing constantly. But this is just from having written, um, a good chunk of short stories and poems and stuff. It's like I know that I have all these notes, and that's the stuff that you got to get out of your brain in the moment when you think of it. but then you have to have the discipline part where you sit down and you put all those those pieces on paper. And somewhere in between those two acts, like they're very deliberate things that you set this time aside to do. Um, the note taking just happens on the fly when you're at with the kids at home, at work, whatever. But the rest of it is you got to sit down. You got to sit down and say, I'm gonna do this. And hopefully it's fun. And usually it ends up being fun. It's very satisfying because at the end you have something to show for it, and you're like, wow, okay, cool, and you can see the bigger picture, and it's really cool. But getting there can be hard, especially if you're not used to it. If you're not used to it, exactly, because you want that instant hit of
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, this is fun, this is cool, and you don't
It's a
really
little
get
bit
that when you're
more, it's kind of like when you, I feel like writing is a little bit more like building a house where until you, so you're building the frame, you're putting the shutters on, and none of that is a lot of fun. The fun part is at the end, you look and you say, look, I built a house. And music is a little bit more like making a cake. You know, it's like as you make the music, it's like you've got that, oh, this bass line sounds so cool. Listen to this great beat. You're like tasting, you're
yeah,
like
you're tasting
tasting the
it.
icing, eating the raw batter, which I can't get my family to stop doing. Um, and but so one thing you said though that to me this makes this whole conversation could go on for the rest of the year, and if I only got this one nugget, it would be
Hmm.
so worth it to me because you're talking about the idea of writing things down in a notepad. And
Hmm.
I've always found, so I went to this film and video school when I was in high school, and one of the things they'd make us do is we had to come up with a character and we had to come up
Hmm.
with a plot idea each week. And so one of the things I did, I read in like Sid Field's book or somebody's book, they said carry around a notepad. And I did it, and all of a sudden, at first, I didn't have that many. But every time, if you put the idea in there, all of a sudden, it starts sucking them out of you. And
Yeah.
you train yourself to have more ideas. And you talked about thinking about in terms of scenes and things like that. And so I think that what I need to do is instead of stopping, it's like, okay, I've got my notebook of characters, I got my notebooks of ideas. Well, I think ideas and characters are too easy. I need to pick a character, pick an idea, and just for then, say, okay, this week I'm going to have my notepad and I'm going to think of scenes so I can get those
Yeah.
pieces like you're talking about and then have something to work with and put together instead of feeling like, oh my gosh, I've just got cinder blocks all over the yard. They're dumping
Yeah.
wood in here and I've got to figure out how to make a house out of this.
Yeah, it's true. You know what's really interesting? What I'm reminded of now is that a story that I had written um, years ago, like maybe 15 years ago or something. I reached out to a writer who's a friend of my sister's. He's written a memoir. Uh, he has a really interesting life. This guy, he robbed banks for a long time, and then he was very successful at it, and then he went to jail and was in prison, and he wrote his whole life story in this book, and now he's a really he's just a writer. That's all he does, and of course he's not in jail anymore. But I saw him speak one time, and he's a good friend of my sister's, and I sent him a story, and I remember it was the I didn't send him the whole story. I sent him the idea, so it was kind of like a synopsis, I guess. But he kept asking me, "What do they do? What what does this person do? What do they want?" Um, and I thought that what I was sending him was like an adequate description of a story, but it wasn't. It was more like this is the scene, this is the situation. And sometimes I think we get we start to think that just because we've come up with this situation, like this bigger scenario of what's happening, and then we kind of tend to say like, okay, so like in a world where this is happening, and we got this person, and they're there, and you start describing the person, but then you just say, and then all kinds of stuff happens, or this kind of happens, and it's crazy, and it's going to be cool. There's a lot. I think that's a headspace that person can get in who's kind of trying to create something, but there's no detail. There's no um, like sequential series of events that are deliberate, and they speak to what the person actually wants to do, because that's what creates um, these scenes, the scenes and these and this stuff happening over time is, what do they do? What are they actually doing? And it's based on what they want and what needs to happen. Um, and that's what's really fun about writing. Like, for example, I'm writing the second issue, and I was really stuck at the very beginning of it. Um, and what happens is I can have like a block, and the block is a terrible place to be in, like a writer's block, because you just see the scene, but it's like on pause. And I'm like, I need for them to get from point A to point B, and I'm just like thinking about all these logistical, you know, scenarios, possibilities of how can these two characters get from point A to point B, and then that's when you get in the weeds, like start thinking of all the details. But but then eventually you just kind of got to get yourself in the scene, and you got to start like working it out. You have to start putting in possibilities of different things that pop up. And then what happened in this instance was another character just came out, like just popped up for me, and then it took a lot of the weight off of the pressure off of me to come up with what these people need to do, because this other character came into play and they have something that they need to do, and it 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 just in the best way possible, it just helped the whole story move along, and it incorporated these other two characters, and then it just joined their two paths together. And so then that's like the beauty of writing, is like all of a sudden here's this other character that's introduced to the story, and their paths intersect, and now they're going together to go achieve these goals that they both um, mutually want to achieve. um, and so um, I don't know if that was like a happy accident, but it was like just trying out different possibilities, basically.
Well, so and you were talking about this idea of when you're in the scene and people having their own motivations and it not being just, things are happening. I think a good example of that is you've got a scene that we're going to be able to share a sneak peek with people. I'm going to put it in the description after this. So could you talk a little bit about that scene in the hospital and kind of how some of these things that you've been talking about uh, maybe came into play as you were writing that scene?
Well, yeah. So that particular scene, sure. Let me try my best to try to break it out and break it down, in at least in regards to what I was talking about now. Um, there's the immediate, um, the very at the very basic level in that scene. So the scene is that the main character, in the script, his name is Andy, but I'm gonna change it back to what I initially had envisioned it, which was supposed to be Alex. But I'll just go by what the script says. Andy is the nurse. He's showing up at work. That's the background. But in the scene, he's he's at work, so he has to perform the function of his job. So that's like the basic need. Like that's what's happening there. Um, but but all this stuff is happening around him. Like that. So that was very easy for me, because it was basically just describing what happens every day at work. But but inevitably something happens, where he has to go take care of somebody at his one of his patients, and the patient is having like some major issues. um, and so he has to try to um, navigate performing his job function, which is kind of run of the mill and typical for him. And he's kind of jaded and kind of, like over it. But then this phenomenon happens at his job with this one patient, where this patient is exhibiting these these abnormal for him
Symptoms.
behaviors, symptoms, exactly,
Yeah.
like pretty acute, meaning like the onset
Acute
is really
symptoms is a
drastic.
good word for it.
Yeah, very acute symptoms that are very scary and very weird, and And so he's just like, oh great, like all this guy wants is a normal day at work, because like again he's like burnt out and tired. But he as soon as he shows up on the scene at his job, they're telling him like this patient's had a really hard night, um, and uh, and then all of a sudden the alarm starts going off in his room, which is how it is in a normal hospital. And so they run into the room, and this guy is like trying to get out of bed. And for maybe some of your audience, they might not know. I don't know how many people know this in real life, but there's quite a few instances where patients have to be physically restrained. A doctor has to put in orders for patients to actually be physically restrained. There's different types of restraints. In this particular scene, the patient has wrist restraints, which are like Velcro padded cuffs that are put around the wrists, and then they are actually tied to the sides of the bed. And we do that for patients who are at risk for hurting themselves in various ways. And again, it's not like arbitrary where the nurses decide that. It's the doctors decide that for the sake of the patient's safety. Um, and in extreme cases, they'll restrain the legs and the arms. So the main character Andy and another nurse go into this patient's room, and the guy is trying to get out of bed, and he's like half climbing over the side rail of the bed, and his arms are like fixed to the bed, but they're like behind his back because he's like lunging out of the bed, and he's physically fighting against the restraints. And he's sweaty, and his veins are popping out, and they both see that, and they're like, "What the hell is going on?" You know. Um, so he has to figure out what you got to do, you know, and that's just like a normal nurse in a hospital. But the guy gets out of one of the restraints, like it rips off the bed, and so Andy has to go and hold his arm down, to try to get him to calm down. They're both trying to talk to him to verbally de-escalate the situation. That's not working, and this guy is like cussing, like he's like saying really horrible stuff to the nurses, and he's like it's almost like he's possessed. Basically, he's like freaking out and screaming at them, trying to get out. And then his eyes start to glow, which is not normal for a regular person, right?
Not
Um,
usually a good sign.
right. And so then all of a sudden, the nurse that was talking to Andy says, Andy, watch out, look at his eyes. And then the guy ends up shooting lasers out of his eyes while he's having this huge like fit of like rage and trying to get out of the bed. And laser beams shoot out of his eyes, and they're directed at Andy's hands, which are holding this guy's arm down. And the lasers end up slicing through, across Andy's hands and trying to get his hands off of him. But miraculously, nothing happens to Andy's hands except the laser beams from this guy's eyes went through the bed and went through his own skin and everything. And so that's where the scene kind of ends, is where like Andy's looking at his hands afterwards and seeing like what the heck's going on. And um, and then the guy who had the episode is like passed out in the bed now, and his vital signs have all tanked, and he's like not responsive anymore. And that's indicative of the bigger problem that's going on in the world with this illness that's affecting the superheroes, is that regular people um, are starting to show symptoms of having superpowers, people that didn't have superpowers before. That's like that factors into the bigger plot of the story, where this illness is affecting the superheroes and regular people in ways that nobody understands, and that kind of gets explained more and involves more as the story goes on.
One of the things that you do that I love, and I think really ties into that idea of like, who is this character or what do they want? So often you read stories, and especially anything mainstream, but definitely comic type stuff. You see a lot of characters who they're doing things, and it's like, are they doing that because they would want to do that, or are they doing that because they need to do that because that's the next plot point we got to get to? And I feel like, and I guess some of this came a little after that scene, but you do a great job. I mean, so this main character, he has so many different things pulling on him. He's really having a hard time at his job. He's getting burnt out. Same time, he's got his family. They're in a new place. He's got a son who has an issue that he has to deal with. He's got but at the same time, he needs to be making money, and so he can't afford to necessarily take off work. And all these different things, we don't necessarily have to get into the specifics, but I just think that they do such a good job of making the story feel more real, to where you're going to identify with the person that you're reading about. And if there's nothing to actually identify with, if there's no real tension or conflict, it just doesn't feel as fulfilling to read. And you do a great job. I mean, if you can have a great character with that feels real like that, I think you can put them into just about any type of story, and it'll work. One thing that I want to do, I want to pull up. So you did some sketches, and you
Yeah.
put them into a tool called Whisk, one of Google's AI tools, to do some storyboarding. So I want to pull those up and show them to people, but in anticipation of the fact that I may run into technical difficulties in the process, would you mind? So we've got Mario watching, and he has asked, and you touched on this a little bit, so I think this would be great to hear you talk a little bit more about how do you stay focused on the main storyline. For those of us, so I think Mario and I are both really idea people. We're like,
Yeah.
the ideas are coming all the time, and then what he mentioned is you may start with a character like Captain Kate, and then you end up creating an entire mythology for the history of Atlantis. So could you
Right.
talk a little bit more about how you stay on task and how you maintain that discipline?
Yeah. So that's a good point. So and this is where people can get in the weeds, right? Like when I say get in the weeds, what I mean is like kind of get lost and get on a tangent and can spend too much time working on all these little things that don't advance the story or help you create. Um, I'm going to give an example. There's all this software out there for writers that are like combinations of like a word processor program as well as like creating like a like a bulletin board and like a scrapbook and all this stuff. And some of these programs are like really expensive, and it's all designed for writers to like have all this stuff so they can put all their ideas, like pictures and little things that they've collected, and so they can, have all these scraps of information that they can build their world and advance their story. But I think what to Mario's point or his question is that like there's been times where I should be sitting down and writing, but I start looking at these softwares and thinking, oh, I want to get this software because I have different levels of this story that are all working simultaneously, and I want to organize them. And then I just start thinking about, well, how can I do that best? Well, I know that there's these software, I'm going to go look at them, and I start like shopping for software that I don't eventually buy. And all it ends up doing is taking time away from the task of writing. And and I say all this to kind of illustrate the point is that there's different levels of involvement in writing where there's the actual act of sitting down and writing, and that could be either taking the notes that I've put in my phone and plugging them into a bigger document. And what the document looks like is it's just paragraphs, um, and the paragraphs are like in sequential. They're in chronological order of events, um, and what I'll just end up doing is that's the actual writing, like that's the nitty gritty of getting the stuff done. But to Mario's point, there is like a bigger concept, like the I guess it's like the themes, I would say, like the main themes that you want to incorporate and um, stay on track with. that you have to be aware of. And so I just have one document in my Google Docs that just says notes. And inside that document are just random tidbits. And what under inside that document is like a subheading of themes, and I'll just kind of need to go back every once in a while and look at those and review what the themes are. But more often than not, I still have those themes, those greater umbrella ideas, like those overarching events and ideas. Um, I'll still have them in top of mind, so to speak, while I'm getting into the nitty gritty with the events. So, but to be honest, I don't know if this is helpful to Mario, but as I'm writing a story, I don't know how it's going to turn out. I think that's part of the fun of writing is that you're in it and you're in the events and you're going along on the ride with the characters. But I think some writers have the ability to come up with a overarching theme and like a whole story arc, and all they're doing is just like putting the words to paper. But I don't work like that. Like I kind of get involved with the characters and just go on the ride with them, and that's actually really really fun because you don't know how it's going to turn out. Um, but it can be aggravating too because you want that reassurance, right? That you know there's going to be a completion to the story, or that you know what to expect. I think some people want to know what to expect with the evolution of something that they're creating, but that's where you have to kind of trust yourself and kind of let it go and just go along with the ride.
All right. Can you see this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, it worked. All right, so we can see here what you talked about, and I think one of the things you mentioned is that when you are writing these scenes, that you really see a lot of the detail, and you can notice that here that there is a lot of detail, and the way that you write the script, I think people will notice you do really you include a lot of these details, things that I think would, I mean, it would be really fun to see the right artist uh, put some of this stuff together. So that was that was what you came up with in uh, just pen and paper, and
Yeah. It's kind of funny looking.
then through so Google has a tool. They have their image FX lab or whatever, and they have a tool called Whisk where you can put in a picture, your subject, and then you could put in a style that you want, like another picture as a style reference. You can put in a scene. There's all these different things you can do. And so Bert did that, and this is what Whisk came up with, which I mean, how'd you feel? What'd you think, Bert? Were you happy with the result?
Okay, so um, I was so just as a disclaimer, I don't think I would ever use AI as like a tool to come up with the like finished artwork for a book. Um, that's just based on on this little bit of experience that I got from trying this out. But it's also, I think, just because I like the idea of establishing a relationship with a writer and having a co-creator and going down that whole path. Um, and but anyway, it was cool to play with this software, and it was just fun because everything existed in my mind so far, and so it's cool to see a visual representation. But so for this is kind of like a happy like accident. Um, I have found there's like two or three different comic generator, like AI comic generator websites, and I tried a couple of them and they were just terrible. Like what I mean by terrible is that they don't come up with images at all like that look or describe what you put into them. It's bizarre. It's almost like trying to work with like a child that won't listen to you. Um, and This one was surprisingly. helpful and very easy. It wasn't effortless. That's not the case, but you had to give it a couple of more little tidbits of information. But it took that picture that I drew, and then I gave it some other prompts for kind of style that I wanted, and then it generated this. And initially, the guy's eyes weren't red, and then I said, and then it has a little window at the bottom where it asks for additional information so that it can make changes. And I put that the man in the bed, his eyes are glowing red, and then it spit this out, and then it's kind of funny because the nurse's eyes are red too, which and I tried to fix that by telling it
Must be
to
contagious.
exactly, but that's not how it is in the story. But that's what the AI thing came up with. And I tried to remedy that by telling it not to do that, to redo the image exactly, but would only make the guy in the bed his eyes red, and it never did that. So this was the best that it came up with. Plus, the restraints don't look like the restraints that I picture in my head because they don't look like real hospital restraints, but or rather the wrist parts kind of do, but the actual um, the straps that go to the bed don't look like that, and his arms aren't supposed to be um, quite so free. You know, that's the whole point. But it in terms of getting a look at what it could look like, it was pretty exciting. It was actually really fun.
But to your point, while it is, I can see a lot of benefits to this for like storyboarding, maybe even
Storyboarding,
for
yeah.
like to show an artist and be like, look, I know this isn't anywhere it needs to be, but this is just so that you can kind of get a feel for my story. Maybe could be something you might use to find an artist to work with. But one of the areas where I think it really shows that weakness you were talking about is, in
Hmm.
the script, you describe this guy, he's like straining against his restraints. And
Yeah,
there's
he's
all
like
that
lunging
that
out of the bed.
tension. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's not here. This guy looks like he's pretending he's a ghost or something. I don't know. But
Yeah,
uh
right.
but still to actually be able to get a feel, so for people like myself, I won't say anything about your doodles, Bert, but for people like myself who, we can't do much more than some chicken scratch type of doodly artwork, it can be kind of cool to get to see, a little motivating to see, oh, well, so this is what it might look like. Another thing is
Yeah, motivating is
this
true.
man appears to be a paraplegic. I don't think he'd be able to fit full legs in a bed that length.
No, you're right. I noticed that too right away that the bed is like completely cropped. It's like the shortest bed ever. Like he doesn't have any lower extremities.
What
Um,
really make people
which
mad
is
is if you didn't hire an artist, but you're just like, I need somebody who's really good at Photoshop to extend this bed.
I know.
Um,
Can you imagine how much work that would entail? That's just
I
defeats the
remember I
purpose.
had
It's no
when
fun.
I was a kid, I did some graphic design and stuff. And one of my friends' dads came to me. He said, "Yeah, I need you to make a logo for this golf brand I'm starting." And I said, "Oh, okay. What you want the logo to look like?" And he didn't tell me any like inspiration or any references. He said, "I want you to take this picture," and it was a picture of a golf guy like getting ready to swing. And he said, "I want you to like
Yeah.
change his arms so they're like up." Basically, he wanted me to take this picture and like somehow he thought I was going to be able to cut apart this guy's anatomy and redo it to where he was at the end of his swing. And apparently, it did not even occur to him to just find a picture of somebody who was finishing a golf swing. But this was back in the
Yeah.
early 2000s, so we didn't understand stuff like that.
We didn't understand. I know. It's
So we got another
ancient history.
doodle here, and
Yeah.
I want to give the audience a second to, in their mind, see if they can kind of figure out what's happening here. Now, am I right that when you put this into Whisk, did you also put it in with some additional instructions, or did you just start with this to see what you got and then advise it from there?
Well, so for and excuse me, let me describe about like what Whisk does. It's pretty crazy. So you just upload the picture, and for this it gives you the option to excuse me, I did this with my phone, and it gives you the option to take a picture or to upload something from your phone. So I just took a picture of the doodle here, like in my kitchen, and and then it does this little thing where it has like a spinny wheel, like almost like it's thinking, and then it'll show you like a long paragraph description of what it sees, which is pretty remarkable. And it'll be like there's a person standing, you know, and standing over somebody else, and there's a house, and but it described everything that it saw, except it kind of like I think it thought that the person standing up was like a girl. I think it thought it had like long hair, and so the
Long,
cool thing is
fiery
one.
locks.
Yeah, exactly. And so um, with that verbal description that it provides after you put something in, you can actually go in and change that text, the verbal description. So I I, I got rid of the part where it said it was a girl, and I put in that it was a boy, and then I tried to make it clear that their heads and their hands are on fire, and that the person on the ground, that they're also on fire too, and that they're looking at their hands. Um, and Yeah, so once I did that, then I let it kind of generate an image after that. Once I tweaked the prompt.
You know what's interesting, and I think this may. I wonder if this would make artists a little more comfortable. There, so a lot of people they think everything we do, everything we think, it's all just can boil down to like neurological processes and brain chemistry and stuff like that. But one of the things that I think we're about to see when I switch to this next slide, based on what we know and what you've said, we know what this. I think we have a pretty good idea what this is supposed to look like. And when we look at the picture, again, we're going to be impressed, but it's not going to look anything like this here because we there is an immateriality to what we think that you cannot describe to a computer. It does not matter how good we get or how much we feed into it. There is just, I don't think there's ever a way to reduce those immaterial types of thoughts into something that a computer would understand. But this is what it's come up with here. And I mean, and what you described is such a, it really illustrates the point. So you put in your picture and then it described your picture and it got a lot of stuff wrong. And
Yeah,
you kind of fixed it. But even then, what would you, I mean, this doesn't look exactly like what you envisioned. The guy's on the sidewalk. I don't think he was in the first one, was
yeah.
he?
No, he was in the lawn, and and then, but you know what? This was actually a really good exercise, Roy, because it kind of clued me into the fact that it made me realize that working with a real artist, which I'm looking for artists now at the moment, um, that when I do work with a real artist, there's going to be a, a, a likelihood that they might not interpret everything that I
That's a
describe in the
great
same
point.
way. And so this was actually kind of a good, like what I mean by good exercise is like I was like, oh, okay, so I have to probably get comfortable with the idea that it might not look how I envision it in my head, because I'm going to be working with another human being, you know, with another person with their creative, um, with their own creative process, with their own viewpoint, with their own interpretation, and that's like I think the beauty of creating things with people. You know, like as a musician who's had many years playing in bands with people, that's really fun. Is coming up creatively, being creative, and coming up and building something together with other people. Um, and it's always a process, and it can be various levels and various degrees of exciting and satisfying, as well as it can be kind of disappointing sometimes. And I think I needed to be reminded of that, because this is my first endeavor in trying to come up with a comic book. You know, because when you're writing stories by yourself, you're the only person that's coming up with this material, and it just exists on a page by itself. But with this process, you know, you have to have the art incorporated into it, and that requires another person, unless you're an artist, a writer, illustrator on your own, which I am not. Um, but yeah, in this regard, the scene is the guy, they're in the lawn, but but then it made me real. They're supposed to be in the lawn, not on the sidewalk. But then it made me realize, like, how important is that detail? Is that really that important? I don't really know. If they have to be in the grass, like that's not integral to what's happening in the scene. Um, but uh, but still, it's just really fun to be able to see it and to get an idea of what it could look like. It was the most useful AI tool that I had found that could do this kind of stuff.
That does seem like a great tool, and Midjourney will do something. They have some similar capabilities, but um, I do think that that seems like an interesting exercise, especially for somebody who hasn't written for comics before. Basically, you could just feed the description from your script in, see what it comes up with, and be like, oh, okay, you know what? I was envisioning it like this, and that actually is important for the story. So let me make sure I get that right. Which, if it's you and you're actually really working closely with somebody, that's probably not as big of an issue because you can go back and forth. But especially for a lot of people who they get started, they hire somebody to do the art. You don't want to be, you may get some revisions included, but it may be that if you don't describe things in the right way, you might be ending up shelling out more money for a comic that hasn't made any money yet.
Yeah, and I recently got some feedback from a person locally who's written some comics, and he said exactly that. He said that that I should just that he really liked what he read, but all of his comments were basically what you just said, which is to include as much description as possible, so as not to run into that problem of the artist potentially doing things that I might not envision, so that I don't have to create extra work for anybody or have to shell out extra money.
I'll tell you a weird one. I don't know if this is. It's hard for me to believe that this is even true, but McFarlane, the guy who does Spawn, he
Hmm.
says that he draws a bunch of pictures, like draws out the scenes, and then kind of he'll like sometimes switch them up. He doesn't even know what's happening at first. He's just like, this looks cool. Okay, now this looks cool. Here we go,
That's
and then just
crazy.
fits on it, and then does the dialogue at the end, which I mean, I think that there's some people some of the problems that people have with Spawn and the writing, uh, that may explain that may explain why. Sounds like a very plot driven way
Wow, that's
to
just
go
crazy
about
to
it.
me. People do like so many different things. It's bizarre. It's just that's what's so cool about people. People are
The
strange.
coolest is David Lynch going out to a diner, drinking a giant milkshake to get a sugar rush, and then just drinking coffee while he fills up index cards with scene ideas, rearranging them until he gets them to where he
Oh
wants them to
wow.
be. Yeah, man, he's such an interesting guy. Um, well, let me tell you that. Let me ask you this.
Uh-huh.
I so I know that you are somebody who you go out there, you've gotten some feedback. Would you, and I don't know if you're going to feel comfortable doing this, but have you gotten any just terrible advice so far that you can share, either from this or terrible writing in the past, writing advice that you have either followed to poor results or just dismissed out of hand?
Um, I haven't had any. Are you referring to specifically like negative responses, like people that didn't like something,
Well,
or?
so one of the things, it's funny. So like with when I will go to a lot of YouTube subreddits, and people have all this advice for all these different people, and sometimes either the advice I'm like, okay, well maybe that works for some people, but that's not going to work for everybody,
Mhm.
or maybe that is just I don't know why you would even think that was good advice because look at all these people who don't do it that way,
Yeah.
and I guess advice just seems so. And I know Stephen King says, you shouldn't even get anybody's, but don't even let them see your first draft. And I like that idea. It's almost like, your whatever you write is like this little baby foal, and you have to keep it safe until it can walk on its own.
Right.
So yeah, take it however you want. Any kind of advice that either was bad or just didn't apply to you.
Um, I tend to well, it's an interesting place to be, I guess emotionally or whatever you want to say, like when you put your stuff out there in the world. Like I've been in writers groups doing creative writing, doing when I was writing short stories, and you have to show up every week and you have to give them stuff that you've written, and then you're just it's like a firing squad or whatever, like when you and it's nerve wracking, but it's exciting, and and I've always I guess I've just been lucky. I've typically had people like my stuff, but I've had I've never had any like negative responses that were like I hated this, but I've had people not get it. I'd say a fair amount of times, um, and that can be a disappointment. But it's also helpful because it helps me to remember that there's an audience out there, and that writing is not like like that saying like art doesn't exist in a vacuum. I guess I don't know if that's I'm saying it right, but I've heard people say that like the whole point for art and creative output is to be consumed, right? To be viewed and taken in and interpreted by other people. Um, Unless you're talking about people that are like recluse, like shut-ins, like Harvey Darger. Is that the guy that story? Have you ever heard about that guy? He was like a janitor for like his whole life, and he was a shut-in, and they found his artwork after he died, and he lived like in this room and like a border in his house by himself, and his artwork is like this collage. It's like beautiful stuff. Anyway,
Oh wow, no, I haven't heard of that. I'll
yeah,
have to look that guy up.
yeah, that was
See,
like in
now
the
to me,
50s.
that's a true artist. That
Right.
because I feel like if you're not doing it just for your own sake, at some level, to some degree, you're more of like an artisan than you are an artist. You know what I mean? Not, and I don't think
Yeah,
there's
no,
anything wrong with that.
no, you're totally right. And I think as I'm like describing this and I'm trying to work my way through what I'm trying to say is that like I think there has to be you have to be doing stuff for yourself because you won't enjoy it, and you have to be doing stuff for yourself because that's where the unique aspect of the art comes from. You know what I mean? Like if you're just doing something and you're only thinking about the audience, then I think you can get into trouble because like somebody says, like if you try to please everybody, there's like sayings like that. You can't please everybody all the time. You can, please some people some of the time. But I don't even think about in terms of trying to please people. I'm just I'm just doing stuff for myself because it's exciting for me, and I just hope it's always like this sense of like I really just am crossing my fingers and hoping that people like it. But I I haven't had any really bad advice. Um, thank goodness. Sometimes the advice that you get that you don't like, it's worthwhile trying to figure out why you don't like it. It could be because somebody's given advice about needing to put in more work, or change some things, and that can be a hard pill to swallow for sure. Um, and I think that if it doesn't affect you negatively, then you might be you might that might need to set off some alarm bells because um, you might be like deluding yourself a little bit. Um,
And that is
if it
very, it's I've that seems to be a little less common, but you do run across some people who just everything they do, they feel like, it's the first just wrote my first comic and it's like ready to go. It's I could get this thing out there right now. And it's I mean it probably sounds like an exaggeration, but I've known people who they have no question. I mean that kind of confidence, that's great. I like that. But at the same time, I guess it comes down to where you fall on the artist, artisan, and then whatever is at the other extreme. Are you just trying to make whatever you want to make? Because
Yeah.
if you don't care if nobody ever finds it until you're dead, then you, I mean, if you don't care about improving, or improvement doesn't mean anything to you, then just keep doing what you're doing.
Right.
But if you, one of the things, and again, this is a big YouTube thing. So many people, they want to make these videos and they want everybody to love them and watch them, but at the same time, it's them going over their rock collection for like an hour at a time, and it's like, well, okay, you've got to meet the viewer. You got to meet
Yeah.
the viewer halfway. There aren't enough people who want to watch the rock collection.
Yeah, and like for me, so much of being a creative person, like because I, make music and write, is just when I have these moments like of like self awareness and trying to figure out, I guess more these existential kind of like moments of like what the hell am I doing? I realize that the reason why I do this stuff is because I desire to connect with people. That's that's ultimately what it is. It's like if at the very base level it's like wanting validation, because I think for a lot of artists and creative people you want validation, right? You want acknowledgement and validation, but even more than that you want to be praised and all that kind of stuff. But um, what at a very even below that, beneath that is you can't have recognition or acknowledgement without people seeing you, and that requires putting stuff out there. That requires relating to and connecting with people, and ultimately that's what I am ultimately seeking out, and I'm aware of that about myself, and so I think that's why I take some of the advice that's harder to accept. I take it in and let it, I accept it and try to let it sit and figure stuff out. It's like it's a bummer when you get something where somebody says this is really great, but and then they are giving you good advice or just advice that requires another approach or some changes because you're just like, man,
Or like a
I
news
spent.
story. It's like, yeah, this is a great story, but what if you wrote a story about this instead?
Yeah, yeah. Can you imagine? Oh my gosh. And so it's just, but as a creative person, hopefully the process brings you joy, and there's just always more stuff. Like that's what I always go back to as a musician and a writer, is that like even if you put in a bunch of work into something and it just ends up dying on the table, like, or in a notebook or in a whatever, it's just like there's always more, like you have to believe that in your mind, that it's within you, the the impetus, the desire, the spark, like, is in you, and you're gonna let it, you're gonna foster that and keep it going. You're not gonna just like, you're not like, is it, I guess the question is like, are you just dabbling, are you just trying it out, or is this part of who you are? And if it's part of who you are, then you're just gonna keep doing it. And if an idea dies a little bit, then so what, there's going to be more ideas. It's like, it's a very much a belief that you have to have in your mind that I'm going to keep doing this no matter what. So if this doesn't work out, there's going to be more. um, and what I mean by that is believing that the ideas will come, because they will. I mean, if you're a person who writes or creates music or draws, it's like, that you've been doing this for X amount of years or time, and that you like it. So if you just remember those things, you have that reassurance that you're not going to just stop. It is not going to go away. You're not going to forget how to draw or write or play music. Um, so it's always there.
All right, last question.
Okay.
We're fast forwarding 5 years in the future,
Okay.
and now Essential is famous, widely known, everybody loves it. what do you hope that they take away from it? And that could be, maybe just a feeling, it could be a message, it could be anything. How do you hope people are affected by this comic?
I what I hope it does, and this is kind of speaking to some of the recent developments and kind of insights that I've had about the story, um, and where it's ending up, where it's going to go, is that I just hope that it helps people to see the humanity, in society and in others around them, and to kind of be more empathetic, towards other people, to realize that everybody can be vulnerable at times, and in those moments, to just to try to help, and to be at least not be critical and not be a hindrance, but to at least be accepting, and if you can be, then try to help out. And I think that's like the nurse, like that's the very nursey part of me, but as also somebody who's been in therapy for years and stuff, it's like it's like that. That's always kind of what I'm seeking in the world, and I think that's why I like want to create and connect with people, is to just be kind of understood and seen, and so that's what I hope that people uh, take away from it, is that just that people are that we're all human, and we all are flawed, and but there's and that everybody's like really just trying their best, and they're not perfect.
So that message, I mean, I unfortunately I feel like there's a lot of people these days who would not agree with the idea. I feel like there's maybe some people who think that some of us are doing our best, but like maybe doing our best to be the worst or something. But I feel like it really is a part of human nature for most people to try. I mean, of course, we've got some selfishness, but I don't think anybody's at home thinking, I'm got my scheme, my master plan.
Right.
So I do. I love to hear that, and I love to know that such a great story is going to be the vehicle to get that message across. Because I read the script for the first issue, and when you give somebody something to read and you ask them for feedback, we're pattern recognition machines, So that
Yeah.
means that whatever, if you tell us, hey, look in this picture for you know pink bunnies. You're gonna look. You're gonna find pink bunnies that aren't even there. You're gonna be like, look, that no, that's cotton candy, and that's the kind of thing. When you ask somebody for feedback, I feel like they're looking. I know I'm sitting there, I'm looking. It's like, well, if I just tell him how great it is, he's gonna think I didn't read it hard enough. I got to come up with what's wrong with this thing. And I don't think I was able to come up with anything. Maybe I did. I hope that I had something helpful to say. But it is so good, and I think that as you continue writing, and I know that you're still kind of coming back and revising as you go forward, this is just going to be such a great book, and I'm really looking forward to finding out what other people think about it.
Oh, thanks, Roy. Your input and your interest has been just it's been really awesome. I have to say, like you put stuff out there. It's like I talked about being vulnerable. It's scary, but it's just really fun, and it's very validating. Like I said before, and that's the energy. Like that's the fire that kind of gets things burning and gets the train chugging along down the road. So I really appreciate you taking the time. Honestly, it's been great.
Is there anywhere that people can go if they don't want to miss any news, any like once you or if you're show any more little previews or once you start letting issues out, is there anywhere people can go to follow you and find out about that?
That's a good question. I'm starting to think that I need to start incorporating this more into social media, at least my existing social media accounts, because I use that to share stuff about my music. Um, but considering that right now it's only existed as a written material, I don't really know how to share that on like for example Instagram or
But if they follow you on
Facebook.
Instagram, you
Yeah,
can prompt
I
them to
mean,
let them know.
yeah, definitely. That's actually probably the best thing because I use that
And I
for my
have to
music.
say, I don't think that they'll regret hearing your music either.
Thanks, man. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, they can follow me on Instagram. Right now, there's just pictures of my family and some music stuff, but I need to start putting some more of this up on there, um, or at least making people aware of it, because I am kind of delving like full, head first and kind of very in with a lot of intent, trying to pursue this pretty actively. So.
And
Um,
what's your Instagram?
it's uh, Garibay.Bert, I think. Hold on.
Okay. And I'll put it in the description too. Um, okay, well that's
But
awesome. Thank you so much. I think that there's really did you get that Instagram right? Were you checking?
no, it's just Bert Garibay, I believe. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, well thank you for being on the show. I'm really got even I mean I have this a lot of great insight there, and as everybody can tell, I'm a very huge fan. So, and anybody else out there, if you happen to know any other great creators, I would love to do this more. This has been like the most fun that I've had. So, thank you so much, Bert.
Oh, Roy, thanks so much. And yeah, and if any of your viewers are artists, I wouldn't mind, or if they know any artists, I wouldn't mind if they're interested contacting me or talking to any of them.
Awesome. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I will. How should we do that? Is your email on the script? Maybe I don't know. Maybe you
Yeah,
want to
the
put your
email is
email
on
on.
this is on the email is in the excerpt that I sent to you to share with people.
All right. No, just don't send him any emails about Viagra pills or anything like that. Uh, just uh, just artist inquiries. Okay. Thanks a lot, Bert.
Thank you so much, Roy. All right, you have a good one.
Oh man, you were great.
Oh, thank you.